Well, we've all wanted some big names at Arsenal, but as the week begins and we see them linked to other clubs, now is the time more than ever to remain calm and patient. We love that word. This is today's Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. It is greatly appreciated. I hope you're doing good. I hope you're doing well. I hope you've had a really good weekend and start to your week, of course, as well. We're back in the usual surroundings, of course, which means we're back with the usual audio settings and the usual surroundings too. I hope you enjoyed yesterday's episodes. I hope you appreciate that we're still doing them even when we're not at home. We're still trying to produce content for you. And thank you for dropping a like on the video, of course, as well. As usual, doing really, really well. And yeah, we're just continuing that trend, continuing the 1K everyday challenge. So let's not slip, let's not slide. Let's save that for the holidays. Let's just make sure we're dropping a like on the video and keeping our 1K every single day challenge going as well as feasibly possible. Good morning to you all in the chat box this morning. Thank you so much for tuning in. Good morning to Mark and Arsenal Thoughts. Jamie and Baz in the chat. We've got Visionary. We've got Paul. We've got UK Raven and Reese. We've got Andy and Maniac. We've got Loga. We've got who else in the chat? Katana. We've got Leroy. We've got Jonas. We've got Andy Nee as well. We've got Leroy, no, just Williams, just Leroy Williams. Good morning to you all. Thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. And yeah, if you're new to the channel, welcome. We do these every single day at this time, so you don't need to set your alarms. You just kind of get used to it. Your body clock kind of wakes you up ready for the show, and we do them every day with the best YouTube community in the Arsenal space on the platform. Right, let's jump into today's story, shall we? We begin with the women's team. Rosa Kafaji is set to join Brighton on loan for the forthcoming season. In fact, she has joined Brighton on loan. The Swedish international only made a few appearances for Arsenal last season, was really kind of struggling to break regularly into the Arsenal starting 11 following her move from BK Häcken in the summer of 2024. But after a goal in 19 appearances, she's now making this move to Brighton. Of course, Michelle Adjeman spent time at Brighton last season, really benefited from that loan, and is returning to Arsenal this season. We don't know if she's going to be at Arsenal, permanently, or if she's going to go on loan again. But Rosa Kafaji hopefully can get some of the benefits that Michelle Adjeman, of course, had during the previous campaign as well. Now, the latest Athletic deal sheet has dropped, which usually drops at the start of the week. James McNicholas doing the good work that he does, of course, with David Ornstein in that piece for the Athletic. And while there's not really any kind of, indications of big names or really any major updates, we don't really have too much in the way of Arsenal making major moves right now. As we have been saying, and I've been telling you, Arsenal's focus is very much on outgoings right now. And, with the squad going into the start of this season, it is all about the preparations for this team ahead of the new campaign, with the Premier League starting for Arsenal on Sunday. But there is suggestions that they are looking at left-wing options and potential players that could come in on that left-hand side, because the player that is most likely to leave of the kind of higher caliber players in the group is Leo Trossard, of course. So if he is to go, Arsenal would need to find a replacement. We don't really know necessarily the identity of who that player would be, though, at this point in time. But Arsenal are said to be studying those left-wing options. There's been some reports in the last couple of days, of course, around Zinchenko going to Turkey, about Fabio Vieira going to Stuttgart, of course, as well. There's also been links with Trossard to Turkey again after those Fenerbahce links. Galatasaray have recently been linked with a move for Trossard as well. But links with Karl Hein, Albert Sambi Lokonga, and Pauk, of course, who was linked with him. We talked about that story yesterday. So Arsenal can move on some players between now and the near future. Then it will give them more time, of course, to make those moves in the market if they have that time ability to do so. But the likelihood of landing two of the more high-profile targets, of course, has taken something of a hit. And I'm sure will not spark an overreaction at all. Manchester City, as we know, are seeing talks ongoing with Spurs for a move for Savinho, the Brazilian winger. is available for around 50 million euros. Supposedly, he moved last summer for around 40 million euros to Manchester City. So they'll be making a very slight profit off a single season where he only scored 1 goal in the Premier League. And he could now be moving to Spurs. And to replace him and Jack Grealish, who has now joined Everton on loan, that deal is going to go through. Rodrygo is seen. And I sat here and did say that I felt as though that Manchester City would be the team, if any, that would get their hands on Rodrygo. It just felt as though with the players that could leave this summer, and it felt as though the team with the most potential money to invest in a late signing in the window were indeed Manchester City. It always felt to me like this was the most likely destination for Rodrygo. And if he is to move, it seems that Man City are the most likely destination. Arsenal, we talked about the idea of loans. We talked about theorising about this, but it was always just theory. I know that you've seen reports about Arsenal supposedly exploring a loan deal. To my knowledge, they were never really any substance to that. It was all off the back of kind of theory and discussing the idea of a potential loan deal, not an actual loan deal being explored. Is it to say that it's impossible that he moves to Arsenal? It's the transfer window. Anything can happen. But I'm sorry to break it to you that the idea of Rodrygo to Arsenal was always very, very, very unlikely. And again, I always recommend that you stay really careful and cautious when perusing social media. The amount of times I've been sent tweets from accounts that frankly have little to no track record when it comes to any transfers. It's not to say that people can't gain contacts and can't report on stories, of course, but don't fall into this trap. You have to earn that credit. A faceless account like Hand of Arsenal has earned that credit with a strong track record of information. Don't take it from accounts that have barely any, if any, credibility at all, and then don't end up getting disappointed when those stories that have had very little substance whatsoever don't turn out to be a reality. All we've heard that is realistic is that Arsenal have had an interest in Rodrygo, that their name has kind of been in the ring, if you like, and certainly would be ready to move for him if the right deal emerged, but that has never happened so far. So that's kind of where we're on that. And as of this morning, Fabrizio Romano reporting that Ebere Eze is again a target of Tottenham. We heard at the beginning of the window that Spurs had kind of pulled away from a move for Eze. This was the period of the window where Arsenal's interest in Eze was at its strongest, because at that point of the window, Ethan Nwaneri had not yet signed his brand new contract. Now Eze has seen, of course, Nwaneri signed that new deal. The interest from Arsenal, while still there, is not as strong as it was before. Arsenal would need to move considerable players on if they were to move for Eze. Eze is certainly a player that is loving the idea of a move to Arsenal, but because Arsenal are not necessarily there as a legitimate, realistic option at the moment, that could still change. But right now, it's not too likely that a deal happens. Spurs have lost James Maddison. They're also looking to sign Savinho, and this is thought to be separate to that interest in Savinho. Spurs, of course, need a replacement for Maddison for the foreseeable future and have money to spend after they missed out on Morgan Gibbs-White. And that money that they would have spent on Morgan Gibbs-White's release clause is about the same amount of money that it will probably take to sign Eze. So there is interest from them in Eze as well. So it's not a great day to be an Arsenal fan from a transfer point of view, seeing, of course, rivals both locally and title-wise interested and very realistic kind of options for those targets in the market. But yeah, that is the reality. That is where we're at. That is the stories. That is the case right now. And Arsenal's squad is as it is going into the brand new season. And it's in a very good place. I'd said this before. I think there is an element of losing your minds, about it. Same time, if Arsenal don't add that third attacking signing that we've hoped for, I will be disappointed. There's no doubt about that. I think we do need that third player, but I recognise that probably comes from the outgoings that need to happen first because of the financial situation that Arsenal are in. They've spent nearly 200 million quid and they brought in less than 10. So that's not, sadly, sustainable. You need to move players on. We need to move players off the wage bill. We need to get money through the door. And then a seventh signing, a third attacking deal could potentially be looked at. But we will will kind of cover that as and when it goes down. Let's get a part 2, shall we now, though? Get some of your questions in and plenty more right after this. Okay, this is part 2 of today's show where we jump into the chat box and tackle some of your questions, looking into indeed what you're asking today and what you're looking into asking about. If you've got questions, use your capital Q. It really does help them stand out in the chat box. I look forward to answering as many of them as feasibly possible as we try and tackle what is, I'm sure, to be a difficult morning of mood for within the Arsenal fan base. Let's start with Paul's comment. He says, we didn't prioritise the right attacking signing. It should have always been Eze, considering his versatility. The issue is, Paul, is that Arsenal's priorities are different to yours, obviously, and Arsenal were looking always to sign a right-sided player. It was a bonus that Madueke could also play on the left, but they wanted to sign a new centre-forward. They wanted to sign a depth option to Saka on the right-hand side. Madueke was prioritised. The left-hand side was always populated with options. The middle of the park has also still been populated with options. And so therefore the greater need in squad building terms was on the right rather than the left. But if things change between now and the end of the window in terms of a player like Leo leaving, that of course would change how Arsenal approach the end of the window. Sally says, whatever happens to clever scouting, it feels like all the top clubs are fighting over the same players. Where are Ljungbergs, Torres and Vieiras these days? Well, I guess you could arguably say, Sally, that Arsenal have done that with Christian Mosquera. You know, they've looked into a player that, I don't think many of us really knew too much about going into this season. They've identified him as a real talent and they've looked to bring him in. So it still does happen. It's just, I guess there's so much scouting these days that everybody kind of has the same players on their radar, unfortunately. So, yeah, I think there is a good chance that ultimately we do end up still seeing those kind of little gems found by clubs. But at this point in time, it's when you're at the level of competing for titles, it happens a lot less. And frankly, the league is in a very different place than it was when we signed players like Ljungberg and Toure, because you could afford to bring in some unknown players. The league wasn't as competitive as it is now. It isn't filled with as many high quality players as it is now across the league. So it was easier to do it then. Katana says, Tom, why do we need to sell first? We're one of the most profitable teams and have barely spent the last 18 months. Unfortunately, Katana, that isn't necessarily true. When you look at Arsenal's record over the last few summers, last summer, 100 million pounds-ish, just under that spent, and they still sold a lot, the more than they've ever sold really on players in quite a while, but they still made a slight loss in that window. The summer before that, they spent over 200 million quid on Rice, Havertz, Timber and Raya, of course, including that loan fee that was included, and they sold Balogun and Xhaka. They were kind of the two ones that they did manage to sell, but still that was dwarfed by what they spent. The summer before that, Gabriel Jesus, Fabio Vieira, Zinchenko, and then, of course, all the January signings completely dwarfed any sales. We didn't sell a single player for more than 10 million quid in that 22-23 season. The season before that, the only signing that we sold for more than 10 million was Joe Willock for 25 million pounds, but we still spent close to 150 million pounds on Wyatt and Ødegaard and Ramsdale and Tomiyasu and Lokonga and Tavares. You go back to 2020, 21, we brought in Gabriel and Partey, of course, for, I think that was around 70 to 80 million pounds. And again, the only player they sold for more than 10 million that summer was Emi Martinez. We didn't really sell anybody else. In fact, all of the rest were free transfers and loan fees. So that's the problem, is that season upon season upon season, we're spending a lot more than we are making. And so on top of that, you've also got the wage bill. People look at the commercial benefits or the prize money we've got. Arsenal have a wage bill that is closing in on 200 million pounds a year that we spend on wages. We're one of the clubs that pay players the highest amount in the world at the moment, because Arsenal are one of the best teams in the world and competing for titles every single season. So that's ultimately why we sit in this position that we find ourselves in right now. Jack says, Tom, how are Man United spending all this money without selling anyone with the European football? Well, this is the other question mark about how finances work, isn't it, in the world of football? Now, they have, of course, the ability to still move some players on during this window, and there is an expectation that Man United probably will sell some players before the end of the window. But last summer, they were able to bring in quite considerable money for quite a few number of their players. And you'll know how PSR works. They're not in European competition this season, so they're not abiding by UEFA financial fair play. That's a really important factor to consider in this as well. Only teams operating in UEFA competitions have to abide by UEFA financial fair play regulations. Man United are not in a UEFA competition this season, and so they are working within solely the profit and sustainability regulations. And last summer, they sold Scott McTominay, they sold Mason Greenwood, they sold Aaron Wan-Bissaka, they sold a couple of youngsters for more than 10 million quid. So actually, financially, they did quite well. They did spend a lot of money, definitely, still, but they brought in money. And across, of course, the 3-year cycles, that makes them quite solid in how they managed to bring in money. Dean Henderson, Anthony Elanga both went for decent figures the summer before that as well. So, yes, they spend a lot of money, but they do actually manage to get some fees here and there. Now they're not in UEFA competition, which you rightly point out. Ironically, that actually gives them some freedom to work without the bounds of UEFA financial fair play. Jackie says, Tom, from your perspective, if we sign no one else and Liverpool get Isak, will it be frustrating for Arteta, seeing as he might not have had the tools to fully compete? I think we're one short. I think there is an argument that he hasn't been backed the 100% that he would have liked to have seen, of course, in this window, that we would have liked that third attacking player. We've known that Arsenal have been, and Arteta in particular, has wanted 3 attacking players for the start of this season coming into the team. And from a perspective of where the team is at, what you have to say is that they've still done a lot of really good stuff, because we're 2 players deep in every single role in the squad, not including Dauman, not including Jesus, not including any other youngster that potentially moves in, not including if the likes of Zinchenko stays, and so on and so forth. We will have to wait and see. But I think there'll be an element of feeling a little bit let down, but he can't say he's not been backed in this window. We've spent nearly £200 million. We've brought in the mythical centre forward we've always wanted. We've brought in a brilliant couple of defensive midfielders. We've brought in a really good, in my opinion, option in the attacking line that's hopefully going to provide a lot of surprise and prove a lot of people wrong. We've brought in depth in the defensive areas. We've brought in a backup goalkeeper that's got great experience and has won major trophies. So let's not pretend like we haven't done some really good stuff in the window. It's just that 7th signing, you know, that kind of is, that's kind of where we're at as well. UK Raven says a lot of terrible signings just listed in terms of what Arsenal have made or what United have made. But United have, of course, still managed to bring in money for some bad signings that they've made. Also, that's been the key difference. Elodie says Eze isn't a winger. If Arsenal want to play a double pivot, signing Eze will have 3 to 4 players playing that 10 role, which down the line will cause issues. Getting a true left winger should be a priority. Andy says we've beaten them pretty regularly. The Old Trafford record is still bad, but you probably don't just dwell on the FA Cup penalty defeat because it was so useless and annoying. It was a bad game. Luke says reality is we've messed up massively on our wage bill. Players like Havertz, Zinchenko, Jesus, etc. shouldn't be on the money they are. I disagree with you, Luke. Zinchenko and Jesus in particular, we signed both of those players from Manchester City when they are in their early to mid-20s from a Premier League club for significant amounts of money. Moving to a team like Arsenal, they were always going to be put on those types of wages. Havertz, I don't mind a little bit of debate about that, but he was already on a significant wage at Chelsea. Again, massive fee going from one Premier League team to another, and also taking that step up in wages. So we talk about the wages, they shouldn't be on those. They're not very good examples when it comes to kind of arguing that players shouldn't be on that wage. If you want to have a conversation about Reece Nelson being on £100,000 per week, that's probably a better example to use rather than 3 players that move from other Premier League clubs for significant fees at points in their career where they were already in their mid-20s. So not the best examples, but there are other examples like Nelson that arguably you could point to instead. Alex says, Tom, do you feel that we will ever be able to be a sustainable club that competes for the largest trophies? We don't have a multi-club model and our revenue is much lower than our rivals and competitors. Well, Alex, this is one of the reasons why Arsenal want to work closely and comfortably within those profit and sustainability and FFP regulations. This is why they want to work within that so they can be sustainable. They continue to invest in younger players of a lot of talent. You think about Mosquera, of course, coming in this season. You know, you've brought in some players in their mid-20s, like Zubimendi, for example, but we also have some really good young players coming through that we have managed to secure the futures of. Nwaneri, Lewis Skelly, we hope Dauman in the future. Not only that, but Saka and Saliba, we're confident, of course, and calm about their kind of contract renewals as well. So they've been smart in the market in terms of what they've done. And Arsenal have competed across the board for the last 3 seasons. And the expectation is that they go and do that again this season. So in answer to your question, yes. Lloyd says Brighton scouting is top in the EPL. They are about to rob United with this Baleba kids, same way they robbed Chelsea. Those lot are good at sales and we should learn from them. I mean, it's easy to say that we should learn from Brighton in terms of sales, but you don't want to be Brighton. So don't pretend that we should be like Brighton. If you were in the position that Brighton are in, you'd be moaning a lot about what club Arsenal have become. So we can't learn a lot from Brighton, actually, because the way in which Brighton operate is a very different way to a team that is competing for titles operates every single season. So I'm sorry, it just doesn't correlate. It doesn't work that way. You just can't operate in that kind of way if you want to be a team that's competing for the title every single season. UK says, so are you saying that the club profitability is different from buying and selling players? Because we have been in the Champions League for the last 3 seasons. I don't really understand your question, UK, to be honest. Feel free to reword it. I'm not quite grasping it. Being in the Champions League for the last 3 seasons means that we've obviously benefited from the revenue that's come with that. It also means that we have to operate within the UEFA financial fair play regulations. And Arsenal have spent a lot more than they have made when it comes to transfers. So that kind of does fall within those bounds. A2K says, can you list a few players that Arsenal might be interested in for that left-wing position like Rodrygo and Lookman? Personally, I think they might go for a Mosquera type player. Well, I've said before that I think that it's impossible really to know completely. But I have, and I think I said this yesterday, that I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a name pop up that hasn't really been talked about too much this window. That wouldn't be surprising to me at all. But if we get a name that hasn't been mentioned as of yet. Paul says, we can't get angry about not getting players that we like. The squad is currently bloated and we need to trim it if we want to bring in players. Why is this so hard to understand? Well, I think it's a fair point to say that if you look at the squad that's going to go to Manchester United, we've got to leave players out right now. You can only take 20 players into a Premier League game. Currently, we have 22 plus Dauman, plus any other youngsters, plus Jesus. So we're going to be leaving players out. Of course, there's question marks over Leo's fitness, so that might make that decision a little bit easier for us. But everyone else is coming back. Gabriel is back. Timber is back. Calafiori is back. Havertz is back. So we've got to leave at least one senior player out of the squad for the next game against Man United. Plus, if you want Dauman in the squad, you've got to leave another one out of the squad. And we're talking about adding a 7th signing this summer. That doesn't count Zinchenko. That doesn't count Lokonga. That doesn't count Vieira. That doesn't count Karl Hein. Arsenal have more than their 25-man squad if you include the players that haven't yet left the squad yet. So we all talk about this idea that we desperately need more players. And look, I want to sign that 7th signing. I want to add another attacking player. But we are still very bloated in terms of competitive options. Most squads like Man City have 17 to 18 competitive players, and then they have 5 to 7 youth options, players that can get minutes, but if they're left out of the squad, it doesn't really kind of raise any eyebrows. But Arsenal aren't in that situation at the moment. Brian says, how much would we save on a weekly wages if we were able to sell the likes of Zini, Lokonga, etc.? I mean, Zinchenko is a significant wage. He's on about £150,000 per week base wage-ish because we signed him, as I said, from Manchester City at 24 for 32 million quid. He was always going to get a decent wage coming into a team where he was expected to start every single week before those injuries hit his career. And then, of course, the likes of Lokonga, he's not on a lot. I think he's on like 40 to 50. I mean, that's quite a lot for a player that doesn't play. But again, 40 to 50 is probably what you're going to put players on when they first enter the kind of the club in a potential competitive capacity, like Vieira, who's on about that as well, 40 to 50, I think. So if we can move those players on, you can definitely get quite a lot off the wage bill. Let's go to Eddie, who says, did Eze's transfer always depend on Nwaneri's extension? It never felt like Nwaneri's contract extension. Nwaneri wasn't going to extend. Well, it had more of an impact than I think a lot of us realised at the time. At the time that Nwaneri deal was being discussed, it felt like it didn't necessarily have as much of an impact, but it turns out later on down the line, more information has come to light, and we've learned that it did have quite a significant impact on their potential to move for Eze. Lloyd says losing Eze to Spurs will be a blow to all Arsenal fans. Arsenal need to make this happen, get the deal with the player happening, and then the deal with the club. I mean, yeah, again, it's not a case of like losing a player if they haven't moved for them. If Arsenal, look, it's very simple. This, if Arsenal want Eze, and I mean really, really want Eze, it's surprising to me that they've not moved more formally at this stage. And I think you listeners should probably realize that as well. If Arsenal really, 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 really wanted to sign Eze this summer, I cannot help but think it probably would have already happened. Because a player of that caliber, even with the idea of moving players on, I get that. But I feel as though, and I think I was listening to Harry talk about this, like it feels like Arsenal would have the capacity to make it happen if they could structure it in some way. The expectation that players would still be moved on. I feel like if they really desperately wanted the player, really, really wanted the player, they would have made it happen. But so far that hasn't happened, and it seems reliant that they're willing to kind of be open to the idea of missing out on him unless they move players on. Samuel says, Tom, which left winger would you go for if we had to bring on one? Preferably not one we've discussed before, so I can fixate on them instead. Really difficult question because, as I say, my knowledge of European left wingers, I tend to kind of, when the players get linked these days, because I'm not across it as much because I'm covering Arsenal so specifically, I usually do my research in depth when we get those links. But it's not an easy question to answer. And there's not loads. You know, I was a fan of Nico Williams. I didn't necessarily think it was a huge step up, but I was a fan of him. Liao, I have my issues with, as you know, because I think he's too inconsistent. It's not obvious to me who Arsenal will move for, you know, in this window. Malik Fofana's being talked about a bit. I can't say I know too much about him. So yeah, tricky. Frank says, Tom, you want to say Zinchenko moving from 30k a week to 150k a week, 5 times his form age is a good deal. I want to say, mate, that he's going from playing at 24 years of age for Man City to Arsenal, where he's going to play every week. So he's going to put on the same kind of wage bracket as players that are also starting week in, week out in that team. Bear in mind that even in that team, he's going to be earning less currently than what Gabriel is on. He's earning currently less than what I believe Saliba will get on his new contract. He'll be earning less than what others are earning as well. So, yes, that's how it works. I'm really sorry that people don't like that, but that is just how it works. You get that move. And if he'd have managed to get into the Manchester City starting 11, as he did do the Arsenal starting 11, and signed a new deal, that's what he would have gone on to. He would have been on a bracket of around that amount of money per week if he'd have signed a deal instead of moving away from Manchester City. So, yes. OP says, the point you've just raised about if the club really wanted Eze, we would go for him is completely right. But what about Rodrygo? Hand of Arsenal mentioned that he was our unanimous top target. The problem with the Rodrygo thing has always been timing. The timing of the potential for him to move was never really there because Real Madrid were in the Club World Cup. So they were playing, and Rodrygo still at this point, it's different to Eze. Eze has been very open about the idea of moving to Arsenal. There's always been a sense that if Arsenal were to come in, personal terms would be no issue. He would move at the drop of a hat to Arsenal if the opportunity arose. That's not been the case with Rodrygo. Rodrygo being involved in the Club World Cup has meant that he has been able to get a little bit more clarity over his future. He initially seemed, according to reports in Spain, had been saying that he was going to stay and wanted to stay. But as the season begins, it becomes ever much more clearer that he doesn't feature as prominently in Xabi Alonso's plans. But by this time, Arsenal have already invested big money in other players. And so the idea of a €100 million move for Rodrygo just hasn't necessarily been a realistic opportunity for Arsenal. So timing has been the big thing. Man City could be in a position where if they move on Savinho, if they sell James McAtee, they've already loaned out Jack Grealish, they're in a position where players have left at this stage of the window of importance to that starting 11 that they could now move for him. So it's always been a question of timing when it comes to Rodrygo. And it's never really worked out. It may have been the case that he was seen very highly as a market opportunity on the list for Arsenal, but the capacity for Arsenal to spend and move for Rodrygo, regardless of the Madueke stuff, because we're talking about a player that could cost potentially double what Arsenal ended up paying for Madueke. So that doesn't really change things. They would have had to see Madueke not happen, and they probably would have had to see a sell of Gabriel Martinelli or Leo Trossard for that to happen, which, of course, at this point has not happened. So it's all been about timing. It's always been about timing. Kamal says, why are we always explaining and not doing what we are supposed to do? Well, Arsenal have done what they've been supposed to do. I mean, people don't want to give them credit because they're pining over this 7th signing. But Arsenal have done what they've been supposed to do. They've gone and got the centre forward that everyone has been absolutely losing their heads over. They've gone and got a replacement at 6. They've gone and got a replacement for the number 2 at 6. They've gone and got a number 2 to Bukayo Saka. They've gone and got depth to Saliba. They've gone and replaced Neto with a more effective player. They have strengthened the squad. They have improved it. Arsenal's squad is in a much stronger position at this time than it was at the start of last season. We are much better if we lose key players like Saka or Ødegaard. We are in a much better position. Not only that, but they've managed to blood in some younger players and, of course, have now experienced what Max Dowman can do. They've renewed contracts for Miles Lewis, Skelly, Gabriel and Nwaneri, and they're looking, of course, to try and renew Saliba and Saka in the near future as well. So this idea of saying that Arsenal haven't done what they're supposed to do, they've just not done quite exactly what fans have wanted, which was that third attacking player. And the window remains open, and that could still yet happen. But this idea that Arsenal are being accused of not doing what they should have done, I can't get on board with. And to me, that just comes across as quite greedy to me. We still yet to move players on. We still need to sell. I'd always maintain that those players that were going to leave are more likely to leave in August because they're not at the top of a lot of clubs' wish lists. And if they manage to move those players on, we hope successfully, then maybe we get that next move. So that for me is what is the most key. I know that a lot of you feel that the Madueke deal is what has kind of had a negative impact on our capacity to do other deals, but I can't go around I can't explain it over and over again. I can't explain it well enough anymore. Arsenal's priorities to get deals done were to bring players in as early as possible. Remember when we were sitting here when I come back from Canada in June, people were moaning how slow Arsenal are and not doing their deals quick enough. And yet I'd always explain that as long as they got the key deals done before the Premier League season and ideally before pre-season, and they managed to do that with the majority of their deals and then obviously brought in Gyökeres and Mosquera before the second pre-season game, so they're still able to integrate, still able to get really important time with the team. And we're seeing the benefit of that now in those games against Villarreal and, of course, more recently and more importantly against Athletic Club, that we're now in a position where they did do deals quickly. But now there's complaints that we didn't do the right deals quickly enough. Like, we haven't even seen what Madueke is going to do. Not to mention that he created a brilliant chance for Gyökeres that could have easily got him his first assist in an Arsenal shirt on the left, which is an area that Arsenal fans have been pining to see something different in that area. So not only did they bring in a player that's going to give us that depth to Saka, who I have my doubts about, who I have my concerns about, but I'm willing to be patient and to not look silly now by posting anonymously to social media websites about how ridiculous a deal is. I'm willing to be patient and see what he can bring to the team. And then we can have a discussion later on about how successful it has been. But it was really important that we not only got the deals done soon, but we got the players in to strengthen those positions. I don't want to be in a position next season if we lose Saka for another 4 months where we've got an 18-year-old playing out of position in a weaker role. I want to have a Premier League ready, experienced, inverted right-hand side player who's got the experience of doing that at a really high level. And we've managed to get that. So I struggle with this idea that Arsenal are not doing what they're supposed to do, because that just comes across as gluttony to me. It comes across as greed to me. So I want more. I want one more signing, but I'm not being down on what we have done, because what we have done is really good. What we have done in the market is really, really good. So it's just nuts to me how people can be so mental about where we are as a club in the window as we are right now. We've nearly broken our record for spending for the second time in 3 summers. I think we probably still will before the end of the window happens. And of course, we're still looking to move on some important players. Arsenal thoughts, thank you so much for the kind donation. Says, feels like Man United are a bogey team. Why do we always seem to slip up against them? I don't know, but we have a few of those teams, don't we? A few teams that we just kind of drop points against we shouldn't. West Ham seems to be one of those at home. Palace have been at that a little while. Aston Villa have been one of those teams. So We have a few of them, and we need to kind of, remove the skeletons from the closet this season in that regard and start the season with a big win. Rasmus, thank you so much for joining up as a brand new member. Really appreciate your time and your support and listenership of the channel. And Benny, who's been a member for 16 months, says, remember, with the ITKs wanted to spend £300,000 per week on Nico Williams. I like Nico Williams, but how much of an upgrade would he have really been on our left-hand side? Not loads. I don't think loads. It's been a window where we haven't been able to go and get a Declan Rice signing. There's not been a really Declan Rice type player on the market for us for what we've wanted and the key roles that we've wanted. That's not really been there for us. I don't see Rodrygo as that guy. I would have loved Eze, but even Eze, it's not Eze. The thing about Eze and the comparison with him and Rice, well, I think both of them are world-class players. Rice was coming into a team that desperately needed him. And while I think there are traits in Eze that we do desperately need, his position and role, he doesn't immediately start for Arsenal. That's the ironic thing about Eze. He doesn't necessarily start for Arsenal immediately. So there's a question mark there. And if we are to sign a player, as I have reported, I feel as though that player will be more of a left winger than Eze. That's the sense that I get from where I'm at right now. I don't think it'll be Gordon UK just because I can't see Newcastle selling him. I just can't see Newcastle selling him. It'd be mad if they did with the situation that they're in right now. I know they've brought in Anthony Elanga. I know they'd like to sign another forward as well, but I just can't see that happening. Stephen says Trossard 50 million, Vieira 50 million, Lokonga 2 million. This might be a little harsh on Lokonga. Hein 3 million, Zinchenko 12 million, Nelson 10 million. If we can get over 30 million, I'd sell Kivior if you wanted to go, provides we have a replacement. Well, I mean, that's the thing about the Kivior one, right? If we sell Kivior for 30 million, we're going to spend about that replacing him. So why do we sell him? That's the Kivior sale. I don't think has any bearing on what we do in an attacking transfer capacity. I just don't see it. I can't see it happening. AJ says, I feel that we've been sold on Eze and would be upsetting to see him go to Spurs. Doesn't mean the club hasn't done enough up till the date. If we don't get that third attacker, we might just leave ourselves short. Well, the question mark is, you've been sold on Eze, but I get the sense that the Eze stuff, I reported in May, breaking the story that Arsenal had an interest in him. That came way before Winery, of course, signed his new deal. Way before. There's been an interest there. There's been an interest for a while. They've obviously always kind of scouted him and followed him and appreciated his rise. But there is an understanding at 27 years of age that is a factor. But when it comes to this idea of that we've been sold on Eze, it comes from the state of what media is right now. Media and the coverage of Arsenal transfers is a daily plight. It's a daily thing. I mean, on average, how many accounts do you have notifications turned on X? Just let me know. Some of you may have none. Some of you may have 20. How many different accounts have you got your notifications turned on for to give you updates about information on Arsenal players? How many of them are not even accredited journalists? How many of them are just potential ITKs, that are now and again dropping information? And then obviously, if you don't have the notifications on, how many of them do you follow? How many of them do you constantly keep updated, constantly watch, constantly tune in for, constantly try and get updates from? How many shows are you watching a day? How many times are you scrolling or refreshing your X page on social media? It's just so much. There's so much information out there. There's so much being offered every single day. And I say this with complete irony, of course, because we do this show every single day, that I think that we kind of get this psychological idea that if we hear about a player, we almost expect it to happen. I constantly get asked what percentage would you give the Eze deal? I've floated between 70% and gone down to 10%. It floats because we get different information coming our way at different points. There's also an element of needing news. People need news to keep talking about news. So news gets created when it's not even there. Because if we need a story today, there's not much to talk about. If there's not a lot of stories going on, I don't have many slides. People put into the chat box, Tom, you didn't include this story. I'm like, yeah, because I don't think it's any genuinity to it. I don't think it's genuine, so I don't include it. So I only include the stories in our slides that I think, are worth talking about, because I think talking about something someone's been paid to write about, I just don't really think is worth talking about, because I don't think there is anything in it. No, I got sent this story yesterday that apparently Eze had agreed terms. Good friend of, I won't out them, but a good friend of mine and yours, sent me a message about this signing saying, "Oh, Eze agreed terms," and then we looked at the source of the story, and you're like, "Come on, do a little bit of digging." All you need to do is click the story, read what the source is, because what often happens is you'll see a story put out, and it will be like Eze close to joining Arsenal according to reports. So you're like, "Oh, that website's reporting this." You click on the actual story of that website, and it links to another website, and that website links to another website, and it turns out the source in the original source was somebody that is constantly making stuff up. So it's just news, and it draws people in, and it gets clicks, and it gets attention, and people read it, and it just conflates everything, and it leaves us and you, in a state of thinking like we saw with that comment. We are being sold on Eze, and we get it into our heads that he's gonna be happening. It's the guy. But as I say, I hold my hands up. I'm guilty of it as well. We do a show every single day, and Eze is featured in a lot of those daily shows because somebody's been talking about it. So it's just the state of media. And I think we have to really be conscious when we're in the transfer window these days. You can't get sucked in and attached to players that have not yet signed, because you'll end up getting really flustered and disappointed and gutted if they don't happen. I've been there. Dominic Szoboszlai, Marco Asensio. I've been there with players that I've absolutely pined for. I've absolutely pined for these players, and ultimately, led us into that scenario. Jamie says, Tommy's massively responsible for the despair about Eze, sold us down. And look, all I can say is that we've reported as and when what the story is, when it is. All I can say is that we've told you as and when what is the case, when it's happened. I don't like bringing bad news, but I'm not going to not give you it if it's there, if I've learned of it. I'm not going to keep it to myself because I want to keep the feeling amongst us and the conversation that we have all light and fruity and brilliant and exciting. I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't tell you when I think something isn't going to happen as much as I think something could happen, or as much as I think something will happen. It got to a point where I was saying to you, Gyökeres will happen. And every single day I was being told it's taking too long. Gyökeres isn't happening. They're dragging their heels. Just pay the extra 5 million euros. Why won't you just pay the money? The deal took less than 3 weeks to get done. It didn't feel like that, but the Gyökeres deal took less than 3 weeks to be completed. And yet it felt as though, from the way that it was going and the way that it was being talked about, that it was never going to happen. You, we've got to take responsibility for how we absorb media. Have to. Because if you end up getting too sucked into it, too attached to a story, it will hurt. It will hurt when it doesn't happen. Exactly, dear. It felt like 3 months. It felt so long, that Gyökeres deal. And yet Arsenal wrapped it up in less than 3 weeks. Then pivoted away from Sesko after it emerged that he wasn't going to be sold for anything less than what he ended up going Man United for, which is a joke how much that cost. He's not worth that money. He's a good player. He's a really exciting young player. He's got a lot of potential, and I'm really gutted he's gone United. Not because I think he'll succeed there necessarily, but I think it's a club where players sadly go and just fail to achieve their potential. So we were right not to pay that money. But it's exhausting, at times. Absolutely exhausted. William says, time to bring back the positivity and move away from the transfer fixation. Liverpool have made a great transfer summer, but we are in a really strong place. Big year ahead. Time to focus. It's nuts that I think that the business that we've done and the state the squad is in, and you look at the performance. We only played our best 11 in one game in pre-season. We played our best 11 in one game. We had one opportunity because I think there was something about, I don't think Arteta would have wanted to show his hand too much to Ruben Amorim and Man United. Had we have had an easier run at the start of the season, maybe we would have played it more often. We played our best team in one game, and we absolutely smashed that game. We were excellent. Finally had the time to go back and watch the whole game in its entirety and not just individual performances. And we were really good. Weren't perfect. Still things that we need to work on. Still a bit wasteful here and there, but we were great. And that's the only sign and instigation of what we've got to go on for this season. That's it. That game. And I look at that performance, which is still got so. And what's exciting about that is the people that don't think it was excellent. What's exciting about that game is that people think that that was only a good performance, not an excellent performance. If you thought that game against Athletic Club was just good and no more than good, that's really good. Because that means that winning 3-0 against a very good side only comes about from this team with these players playing good. So imagine when they play great. Imagine what they can do when they play brilliantly, in your eyes. So you should be pretty darn happy about that. I just find myself getting just like so not like in a state where I ever want to give up. You're never going to make me do that. But it's just a state of like disbelief, I guess, at times. Kind of like how much weight we place on the next new toy. That we sometimes sit back and don't have a look at our toy box and see what amazing stuff we've got bought for us. We're almost like that kid who's like gets an Xbox for Christmas and he says, I asked for a PlayStation. It almost feels a bit like that. What we've got, what we've had is great. What the business we've done has been really good. And just because we're like that one signing, that one more signing, that seventh signing, when at the beginning of the window, we were like, if we sign 5 or 6 this time, it'd be great. But a 7th signing, if we don't get that 7th deal done, it almost feels like the window's been a failure to people. It won't be. It will end in a disappointing way. I'm not going to take that away from you. I will be disappointed if we don't add that third attacking player because I think it is a signing that will help us take ourselves to that next level. But I think the work that we've done this window, you know, is really good. Dr. Ames says, stop critiquing Arsenal fans that are questioning them. I'm not, mate. At no point have I critiqued anyone for questioning the Madueke signing. At no point. No point at all. During the Madueke discussions, I have explained why Arsenal have prioritised that position. I've explained that. I have critiqued the fans that have abused the player, abused the club, said some awful, unsavoury things about the Madueke deal. But I have sat here and said to you that I have concerns. I wouldn't have paid that money. I would have looked at other players. So at no point would I sit here and say you're wrong to critique the Madueke signing because I have critiqued the Madueke signing. I have to be proven wrong. I have to be shown why we did it, why it was him. I think the conflation or the mistake that you're making is that you're thinking that me explaining to people that are questioning why we prioritized it is me critiquing them, which isn't. It's me explaining why what's happened has happened. I'm in your camp. I agree with you. I agree that we should critique that signing right now. It's a signing that should be critiqued because we still have yet to learn whether it was the right decision to make. We will learn that. We'll learn that, I think, very soon. But no, at no point have I critiqued anybody for critiquing. I've definitely critiqued people for going over the top and abusing the player, but at no point have I critiqued people for, going in. I would say that there is an element of you got to wait. You can't come to a conclusion at this point in time. There's no conclusions to be made because we don't know what he's going to do. But if you've got questions, questions are fine. Questions are good. Ask questions. Asking questions is always a good thing to do. Just don't go over the top. Mark says Madueke's looked good. If I have any issue with it, it's that we paid too much and did not negotiate too hard. I mean, we obviously had a bid rejected and then we went back in. We didn't go massively higher than our first bid. Our first bid was turned down. We didn't really go too much higher. So you could argue that there didn't need to be a lot of negotiation because they already had their first bid knocked back. AJ says, I think Spurs will push Arsenal to make a move for Eze. Who knows? As I said before, it's not impossible that Arsenal still get Eze. It's just unlikely. It's just unlikely. Martin says, basically, Tom is symptomatic of a society who have grown up. I want, and are never told no. It's a spoilt society. I agree with you. I think there's a lot of spoilt nature about a lot of. It's like everyone gets given everything immediately. You've got the world at your fingertips, your phones and the internet. So it's a difficult thing to be told you're not getting something, because nearly everyone can get something pretty easily these days. Eddie says, shouldn't we have dragged the Noni deal a bit longer? So, this is the thing, Eddie, for me that's ironic, is that we sat in June and July moaning about how long it takes Arsenal to do deals. And now we sit here in August saying, shouldn't we have dragged the Noni deal on a bit longer? Do you see the irony there? It's like we can't win. We can't win. We get deals done quickly. We get them done swiftly. We negotiate quickly. We get bids rejected. We put new bids in. We get players in. And now it's like we should have dragged those deals. That's the thing that I don't quite get. Just because it's the player that not necessarily you or those listening, I don't mean you necessarily, Eddie, but others, that you wanted, that's the deal that we should drag. I'll put it bluntly, you're not in charge. We're not in charge. I'm not in charge. So whoever they're going to get, they're going to get. It's preordained. We have absolutely no bearing. Unfortunately, there are some fans that genuinely think they do have some kind of control or influence on what the club does in the market. You don't. I'm really sorry to break this to you if you think you do, but you don't. We don't. I don't have any bearing on what happens. Doesn't matter what I say. Doesn't matter what I write. Doesn't matter what I ask the manager. We don't. We have absolutely no bearing. The only time that we as a fan base have really a bearing on what's gone on is the Super League scenario. That scenario was a collective, across the league movement. Clubs individually, we don't. And so whatever's going to be in a window will be. Whatever's going to happen will happen. And I'd rather whatever we are going to do, we do quickly. We get through the door soon. We integrate players as fast as we can. So that's hopefully what will end up happening this summer. And has already happened this summer. Loss says, all these anti-Noni lads literally forget how much we lost when Saka went down last season. It is this idea that people wanted to see Arsenal prioritise Eze over Noni. The idea that was ever going to happen, was unrealistic ultimately, because Arsenal have priorities. From a personal point of view, I would prefer that we had prioritised that position, the backup number to Saka, because as soon as we'd done that deal and got Gyökeres through the door, we had achieved what I wanted to achieve at the bare minimum in this window, which was to give us two competitive options in every single position. I'll say it until, what's the saying? The cats come home. Is that it? We have achieved that. That is what Arsenal have achieved this window. So far, we have two competitive options in every position. The left-hand side, from a personal point of view, needs to be upgraded. We need a better player there. Cows come home. Thank you, Martin. Cats. But cows come home. Why did I think it was cats? So the cows come home. We need to upgrade the left-hand side still. I think it's more systematic than it is personnel, and we've talked about that. I think it's a bit of both, but I think it's more system-wise, and I think that can be solved by the pivot in midfield that we've talked about, and we saw that a bit against Athletic Club. But we've got 22 players, not including Dowman, not including Jesus, not including a third potential attacking sign in this window. 25. You can only have 20 in a match day squad. You can only have 20. So I was much more keen for Arsenal to add that player. Was it Noni who I would have chosen? Probably not. I'd rather we made a bigger push for an Mbeumo, but I don't think that was realistic. And I think Man United have massively overpaid for him. And I'd rather it was him. Probably not for that money. But Madueke excites me for what he's shown us in the little bit that we've seen of him. And I'm curious to see what impact he can also have, not just as a number 2 to Saka, but more recently and more predominantly now what we're seeing is production on the left-hand side, which is different to what we already have. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's where I'm at on that front. We have achieved that. I wanted the manager to be in a position where I could only blame him. And I'll tell you for now, even if I end up being disappointed with not getting that third attacking player in the window, I think enough has happened in this window where I can do that, where I can look at the manager as the primary reason behind whatever happens this season. Whatever we win, whatever we don't win, from what we have done so far in this window, I personally believe that the primary reason that will happen or won't happen is on the manager. Last season, I couldn't say that. Last season, I was shocked with what we achieved. 2 semi-finals and a second place off the back of 27 separate injuries. Couldn't believe it. Could not believe that we did that. Mental where we finished. We should have fallen off like Spurs and United did, but we didn't. And nuts. Because we didn't do enough in the summer window. I overrated that window. I absolutely hold my hands up, admit that. I overrated that summer window. It was worse than I initially thought, and that was exposed by the injuries that we suffered throughout the season. This summer, we have brought in 6 players that all make us stronger in every single position they have come into. And this squad, as a result, is stronger. This squad in general is stronger. We look sharper. Players like Odegaard look back to their best again, which is really good to see. He looks in a really good place. We are, as a club, in a position that I wanted to be in at the start of the summer. I wanted to be in a position where I could only point to Arteta if things don't go right. And not signing that third attacking player for me is not enough for me to point to anything else still other than him. Arteta is responsible. Arteta is the number one at the front. He is the spearhead. He is the front of this army. And he is the reason why Arsenal will or will not succeed this season. We have done enough to back him. We have done enough to support him. We have done enough to give him the responsibility to take Arsenal to a trophy or to fail at winning one. And therefore, at the end of the season, if Arsenal haven't won anything, for my money, it's difficult to look past it being anything other than the manager that will hold that responsibility. That's where I'm at. We have done enough for that to be the case. But I would still like, because I'm a greedy little boy, I'd still like one more. Just to put the cherry on the cake of this window. That's what I'd like. And I'd like to see us sell some players effectively as well, of course. I'd like to move those players on. So that's where I'm at. That's not me saying that he goes at the end of the season, because as I've said, he has this contract. This contract for me is very important. He has to deliver a title in this contract. This and next season, that's the contract. That's when it's up at the end of next season. So he has that contract, but the responsibility falls on him. That's where I'm at. Thank you so much for listening, people. Really appreciate you always doing so. Thank you so much for listening. And I sincerely hope that you'll join us again tomorrow. We'll be reacting to some more news as we look ahead and continue to count down the days until the start of the Premier League season. Plenty of football to get excited about. Plenty of football to look forward to. I really, really, really cannot wait for it to get going. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back with you tomorrow morning. Drop a like, subscribe, all that usual YouTube-y stuff. And stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.